All right, everybody. Good evening. We've got a special episode of Conversations with Cougars. It's Bernard Nomberg. Of course, it's a Monday night. We do these on Wednesdays, but we've got a great guest tonight. We've got Coach John Poitevint. And Coach, I want to thank you for us connecting this past week and for you making some time tonight. This is going to be great fun. So it's nice to meet you and thank you for making some time.
My pleasure. I'm privileged to do it.
Oh, this is fun. We try to tell the oral history of the Northview Cougars program, the football program, 41 years of a school, a proud football tradition, some ups, some downs, a little bit of everything in between. And each week or each time that we have these programs, we're getting different perspective, whether it's from players, coaches, cheerleaders, managers, however they were connected with the program. And Coach, I understand you were with the program from 99 to 04 or 05 as football and baseball coach. But before we jump into that time, your time at Northview, give us a little bit of background. Where did you grow up and go to school, and share with us some of the yesteryears, and then we'll keep coming forward with it.
Yeah, Bernard, I grew up in Phoenix City, Alabama, and went to school in Russell County, and went on a baseball scholarship to, what is Faulkner University now. At the time, it was Alabama Christian. And then I went up to Tennessee to Freed-Hardeman University after that, and finished, and then got in coaching. First, I went back to what is now Faulkner and was the baseball coach. Then did that a year and a half, and then went to Prattville, and then to Eufaula, and that's where I first had I went to Eufaula about the time, I believe, the time that Northview started it. I went there in '78, and I think that was the first year that we actually played Northview that year. I think it was the third game, and when I was at Eufaula, and as a matter of fact, that was a tremendous football team that I had the privilege of being with at Eufaula in '78. We won the state and only gave up, I think, 28 points, and half of them came to Northview.
You're so right. September 15th, 1978, at Eufaula, 21-14, Eufaula victory.
Yeah, that's the closest game we had the entire year. And we thought we were going to have because it was a new school, a little bit of an easier time, but it was at Eufaula, and I remember it was one that went down to the wire.
Michael Thomas was your star that night with a big punt return. He scored later in the game too.
Yeah, Michael was a great athlete. He played quarterback and safety, and was a tremendous basketball player.
Well, this was a good 20 years before you made your way to the Northview camp.
Yeah, I was at Eufaula, my wife and I, for 11 years, and it was a wonderful time. The head football coach there was my coach in school, George Cochran, and he invited me. That's why we only stayed a year at Prattville. He asked me to come, and so we did, and then we left in '89, and I started as a head coach at a few stops, head football coach, and so we went through Montgomery to Alabama Christian Academy. Then we went to Sweetwater and Geneva, from Geneva to Ozark, and from Ozark to Northview.
Well, you did make your way around the Southeast, or excuse me, the Wiregrass.
Yeah, we did.
And what years or what time period were you in Ozark at Carroll?
I was there. We were at Carroll. Let's see, 96 football season, 97, 98. And that's where I met Emory Latta. As a matter of fact, Emory is the reason I got to Northview. Emory was going to come on board at Carroll. I want to say maybe 98. He had come and gone through spring with us. He was going to be the offensive coordinator. And then he got the opportunity to go to Northview. And so he was there a year, and I think they had some staff changes. I don't remember how it went down, but he kept asking and if I would come, and we did in '99, and we were there like like you said, through '04.
Well,
And
Coach,
then
your memory's spot on, because you're right. Coach Latta was 2-8 in '98, his first year at Northview. And then I'm not sure what happened, but he got it turned around, or y'all got it turned around. You went 6-5, and I think made the playoffs that year.
Yeah, we lost to McGill Tulin. We hosted them, and I kind of felt like we had a few mistakes in that game that cost us, that we should have really won. We had several games that year. I remember we lost a really hard fought game against Vestavia Hills, and they were the defending state champions, and that was at Red Hughes. And then we had a couple of other close losses, but that was a really good team. And they had a tremendous comeback over at Mosley in the middle of the season. I remember that. And it was a really good team. We had some good players. I was the defensive coordinator, and Emory, and he gave me total autonomy, and I had some good coaches to help me and good players, and it was a great year. Really, I wish that it had been a little better record wise, but it was a good year.
Well, Coach, was Northview the largest school you had coached size wise, student population wise, up to that point?
Yeah, I would say yes. I had been at every level. I started out at Prattville. They were a big school, obviously, and then came to Eufaula. And at that time, there was 4 classifications.
Right.
We were 3A and Eufaula, and then I went to ACA in Montgomery. They were 2A, and Sweetwater was 2A. Geneva was 4A. Then Carroll, when I first got to Carroll, we were 6A, we'd gone to the 6 classifications then. And then we dropped, I think the second year I was there, to 5A. And then, yes, Northview was the largest.
Yeah, Northview was 6A by then. They had switched in the mid '80s when the classifications went up. Gosh, you're just like a seasoned coach. That memory of yours is so spot on. In '99, you guys had an awesome victory at Mosley, 31-24. Turned around and beat the snot out of Carver Montgomery at their place.
Yeah.
Then beat Dothan. So you ended the season on a 3-game win streak.
Yeah.
We Tulin 27-25.
Yeah. That Dothan game now, that was Coach Addison had a high-powered offense, and I remember going into it. I told Emory, I said, "You got to score 30, because we're not going to hold them more. They're going to get 2 or 3 touchdowns. You need to know it, because they had a really good passing attack and some strong runners. But our defense, I remember in that game, Josh Maddox and Smith Griggs hit a guy and he fumbled, and they had some momentum going, and it created some momentum for us. And it was 9-3 at the half, and I was still sweating bullets. I told Emory, I said, "You got to score 2 more." But it ended up 9-3, and I would have never guessed it.
Well, that was one of those old-fashioned slugfests in the wire.
Our boys they were not.
Coach, today those kind of games don't exist. It's all about the offense. Doesn't matter what level of football, it's all about scoring. So back then in the '90s, the '80s, particularly the '70s, it would not be uncommon to have a 10-3, 10-7, 14-10 kind of a score.
Yeah, I remember them. And of course, when offenses began to spread out a lot more, that created mismatches, and it created some problems for the defense in terms of matchups. And of course, that aided in the scoring. But that was a game that had so many big plays in it. I remember Irwin said, we had a philosophy, Bernard, that was basically, I guess most coaches had something similar. On defense, I used to tell the players, I'd say, "Hey, listen, I don't care if you make a mistake. Just do it full speed. Go full speed." And, and in that game, I remember we were playing, and they were about midfield, and they had a long pass play, and we called a stunt with Irwin Snell, who was a big defensive tackle. And if it went like we thought it would go, I felt he would break through the line and make a play. But he went the wrong way, but he went full speed. And then Johnny Falk, who was a corner,
Mhm.
blitzed, and he didn't have a call. But he got on the quarterback who was rolling out, and the next thing you know, Irwin Snell intercepts the pass. And it's just an example of a busted play where people went full speed, and as a result, good things happened.
And you get a pat on the back and a big old.
Yeah, a lot of guys got zeros on that play when we graded them, but you know.
But coach, we intercepted.
Yeah.
I can only see those Saturday or Sunday film sessions. Coach.
Yeah, it was a big play, and of course, it was late in the game, and it created a situation where, I mean, we were less than a field goal. I mean, an extra point and a touchdown, and they would have taken the lead. So, yeah, it's just illustrated how those kids play. One of the things I noted when I was coaching against Northview was how hard they played with Coach Kennard and Coach Parrish. It was always a team that. And when I was coaching at Carroll, I remember one particular play, and I'll share it with you. And it was Gabe Gross's senior year, and he, of course, we know what kind of player he was. He went on to Auburn and did really well. But I remember this play vividly in my mind. I told Gabe later on when I got to Northview that it was one of the best plays I'd ever seen in my career. But we had some momentum in that game. It was a close game. I think it ended up like 14-10, and we were up like 10-7. And it was in the fourth quarter, and we had gotten him down. It was 3rd and like 17, and we called a blitz, and we had him surrounded. Somehow he wiggled out, and I had 3 guys. I can see it in my mind, and he reached out at the last minute and got enough to get the first down. And then they went on down and drove and scored and won the game. And I remember telling our team, I said, well, you just got beat by an exceptional player. We did everything we were supposed to, but he did a little more. So that's that was one of the things I remembered about Northview, and one of the reasons that I was privileged to get the opportunity to go and stay 5 years there. And it was, I mean, David Hobson, the principal, who was the reason I went to Georgia some years later. Great principal, Greg Allen, Emory, and the whole coaching staff, Floyd Griffin, that whole group of coaches, it just made it a pleasure every day to go to work.
It's incredible. Speaking of Coach Griffin, he's been on the show twice, and he was a coach during my time, of course, and put in almost 40 years in the school system, 33 years, I think, at Northview. But it is incredible that I think that we calculated somewhere around 80% of all football players who played at Northview were during Coach Griffin's time period. And I think that's just an outstanding tribute to Coach.
It is. And I love Floyd. I tell you one thing about him. He was so well adjusted to things. He never showed any kind of emotions that would, he was always cool and under control. And when I came to be the defensive coordinator and Coach Griffin was the secondary coach, what we were going to do was quite a bit different than what he had done. But he had a way of making it work in the secondary, and I never told him anything. He just made it work. It was a completely different scheme, so to speak. And I was just impressed at how it was just almost seamless that he made it work for the things that he knew, and he used his own terminology with the secondary. You're right. I know that everybody that came under his tutelage was, blessed to be with him. I know that.
And the higher his voice went, the more excited he got. I don't know if you recognize that.
Yeah, I did.
But we knew one of two things was about to happen. Somebody was going to get in trouble, which was more likely than not, or they had just done something that excited him and made a play of some sort.
Yeah, he's an exceptional person.
Guys, we've got Coach John Poitevint, who was with Northview from 99 to 04 for 5 seasons, coaching football as a DC as well as the head baseball coach. Coach, what other responsibilities, teaching-wise or admin-wise, did you have during that time period?
Well, when I first came, Emory wanted me to do the weight room, and I did that during his tenure. Of course, he assisted. That was his forte, but He wanted me to do it. He wanted to use the system that we'd used. And so I did that. And then I taught health a good bit and, of course, PE. And one year, Mr. Hobson, the principal, came to me, and I don't remember what year it was, but in school had just started. And I was in the gym. We were doing some testing for the weight room. And he goes, John, I've got some good news and bad news for you. I said, Mr. Hobson, I don't need good news and bad news. This is the first day of school. I said, well, tell me the good news. He said, well, the good news is you're going to be teaching starting tomorrow at this time, zoology.
Zoology.
Zoology. I said, Mr. Hobson, that ain't the good news. He said, well, you ain't heard the bad news yet. So the bad news was that I was going to have to teach it twice, not once. So it really wasn't any good news. But no, what had happened is one of our science teachers had resigned on the first day of school. And because I had a minor in biology, I got the short straw.
Naturally. And so did you stay like 2 pages ahead of the class?
I tell you what, I learned a lot of zoology.
I bet you did. I bet you did. Now, Coach, you came in with Coach Latta.
Yeah.
You also had a year, Coach Dubos's year.
Yes.
You had a year with Coach Boutwell. Were you still there for Coach Harris when he came on board?
I actually, Bernard was not with Coach Boutwell.
Oh, okay.
What happened, and you may or not remember this, I don't know. What happened was that my last year, the school system decided to do away with coaching supplements. And the only persons that got coaching supplements were the head coach of each sport, plus anyone that had been in the system at least 6 years, and I had not. So it was a sizable cut and a lot, and I hated to do it, but I had to find a way to make about $8,000. So I had to go out and do baseball pitching lessons and things like that. So I couldn't coach under Coach Bow. In fact, I think he lost most of his staff. That may have been the very reason he left, is because of that. And that wasn't just at Northview now, that was at all the schools in the system. And it didn't last very long. And of course, it kind of, I guess, expedited my looking to leave. But I did coach with Mike. Mike DeBose and I had coached together in Prattville back in the late 70s. His first coaching spot, my first coaching spot. So I knew him. And an interesting story on that was this. Emory had resigned, and they were looking for a head coach, and no one there was not really a lot of applicants. And Floyd came to me, Floyd Griffin, and he said, hey, why don't you be the head? I'd been a head coach, had the experience. He said, because if you don't, they're going to let all the staff go. So I told Mr. Hobson that I would take it. And the night before I was to be, I guess, before the board and they would have approved it, he called me and he said, you still want to be the head football coach? And I said, well, what do you mean, Mr. Hobson? So I got somebody that wants to do it. I said, no kidding. He goes, yeah. I said, this lady? He goes, yeah. I said, well, who is it? And he told me. And of course, that shocked me a little bit, but I knew that Mike had his problems in Alabama and he had left. And I know the reason he did it now, but it was shocking. So, of course, he called me too. He knew me and I knew him. So, I worked with Mike that 1 year. And unfortunately, that year just, didn't go like we had expected. We lost some close games, but we could never get it going. So, and then of course he left after that, and Coach Boutwell came. But that I did have the opportunity, and I was the DC under Mike, and Coach Boutwell had already told me that I would not be, which was fine with him. But then when they had this decision not to do coaching supplements, several of us decided to do something different. And of course,
I've always been convinced that it was unfortunately the perfect storm.
Yeah.
That created this 4-year losing streak.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Emory's 2000 team, y'all went 3-7.
and had lots of close games that year.
The 01 team, 0-9. So it's not surprising that between that, probably a lot of kids had left the program to do other things.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
coaching supplement gone.
Yeah.
Then Coach Dubose, who everybody would agree was not the right fit for the program that year.
Yeah.
It's an 0-10 year. And then here comes Coach Boutwell to try to restore some faith in the program, but he too goes 0-10.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until in 04, the Opelika game at the end of the year. And I don't know where you were at this point.
I was in Georgia.
Had you gone to coach and teach over in
At Tequila?
And I don't know if you recall about the Opelika game, but we've had a lot of coaches and players from that particular game. And I don't mean to get too far off subject, but when they finally beat Spence McCracken, who has his own history with Northview, the school, they treated it like they had just won the biggest game of their careers, which for those seniors and juniors, it really was.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I don't know if you had any dealings with Coach McCracken over the years, either against him or in his squad.
Yes, I know Spence and I were good friends. In fact, when I left Geneva, I was the head coach at Geneva in the early 90s, mid 90s, and I had decided to get out of it. I had 3 sons, my wife and I had no time for it. So I decided to go back to being an assistant, and I had 2 choices, Carroll and Opelika. And the reason I did Carroll was because I wanted to coach defense, and Coach McCracken wanted me to be the O-line guy. And I had a lot of history with Spence back when he was at Lee, and we became friends a long time before that. But yeah, no, I know that we had a history. We had some battles with him when I was there, and you know, if he had an opportunity to, you know, make us feel it, he would.
Well, I was going to say he's had some special teams at Lee and Opelika and other places over his career, but we had a special game against him in '85, and I think it taught him a lesson. And if you go look at his record against Northview since then or after that year, you're right. He poured it on anytime that he could against Northview. But then we come back and win that game that we should never have won in 04. But,
yeah, I didn't even know.
Sir?
I said, I didn't even know that. I was, like I said, I left in the summer of 04 and went to Gwinnett County, Georgia at Tequila High School, and I was there 10 years. Yeah. So I did not know that.
I've been working a year and a half to try to get him on the show, and maybe one of these days I can get him on here to talk about those times. But Coach, let's get back to your times at Northview. What stood out to you? You mentioned about how the teams always played hard. You had seen that, coached against them, had seen that. But what was it about now being on the faculty, being one of the coaches at Northview, that may have been a special time for you, if it was at all, for that 5-year stint?
No, it was special. I think one of the things that stood out to me is that there was a great deal of support in our side of town for the school and for the team. And it didn't, I mean, there were people that we didn't even know about that would do things that would be special. And there was a certain amount of pride in the school and the way that we carried ourselves as a program and the school's history. It just stood out to someone who was sort of an outsider coming in. And that's the reason, you know, I would have probably stayed. When I left, I had 26 and a half years in the state system. So I'm fairly certain, had it not been for the lack of the coaching supplements and some of the, you know, it's disappointing those seasons, like you say, but you know, that's life. You deal with it. But my wife and I most likely would have stayed till we got to 30. But those things, like you called it, a perfect storm. And Mr. Hobson, who was my principal at Northview, who is one of the best I've ever worked under, had gone to Gwinnett County, Georgia the year before, and he kept telling me about it. And so Kathy and I finally went, looked at it, and decided that that's what we would do. They offered the same position basically I had there. And so we went, and we stayed there 10 years. But Northview has always been very special to me. You follow, obviously, 11 years there. I spent 10 at Decula High School there in Gwinnett County. And then, of course, Northview, those 5, equally as important to me. And I think back on all of the kids that I had the opportunity to coach. In fact, in the last 2 years, I've had to have a couple of surgeries. And one of the most rewarding things about those surgeries, believe it or not, was they were done by former players of mine. So it just gave me because I knew the kind of people they were first, and I knew that the kind of people they were made them that kind of a doctor too. So, I mean, that was Clint Wade and Chase Smith, orthopedist and an anesthesiologist. So having those, and then Kalen Kossick was another one that played for me, and he also had some. And of course, I know Josh is orthopedist. It's Josh Maddox, and it's comforting to see that kind of quality as they grow up in life, and what they were able to accomplish in their lives. But listen, they were players just like yourself. Here you are in the role you're in, and I remember when you were playing for Northview, and I'd go scout a game. We'd go scout a game where we would see you play, and I remember saying, "Boy, that kid's pretty good at Northview. That quarterback." Talking about you, you were.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I suspect you may have been talking about one of my brothers. I don't know if you remember this, but between 85 and 93, there was 3 of us, all the same number, all brothers, all played the same position.
You're right, and I remember all of them, and I remember they all were good. That includes you.
Well, thank you, Coach. I appreciate that. One of the things that I'll never experience that you have, and you just explained it beautifully as a coach who's been in the game for as long as you have, is when you see your players after they graduate, what they do in life, and they come back and they're contributors to society in such a positive way, whether they're doctors or lawyers or whatever their profession may be. So here's my question, and this is one I've always wanted to ask coaches, is what gives you the most sense of satisfaction, of pride, of just knowing that you've made a difference when after you've finished, and these kids, whether they're girls or guys, whoever it is, go on to do whatever it is they're designed to do in life? What is it about coaching that's fulfilling for you?
I think just what you said, to see them succeed. It's almost like they're an extension of your own family. And I have 3 sons. Kathy and I, my wife and I, have been married 48 years this August, and we have 3 boys. 2 are coaches, and one lives here in Enterprise where we live. And he didn't get into the coaching as far as the education goes, but he coaches his son's travel ball. I just get a thrill out of watching those kids succeed in things that they were taught. At Northview, we had every stop I've been, there's players that I take great pride, not just because they became successes, like I mentioned about those doctors, but just seeing them with their families and running into them. I ran into one not long ago that played for me at Carroll, and he happened to be having a doctor's visit at the same place I was in Dothan, and I knew him when I saw him, but I hadn't seen him in probably 20 years. And he goes, "Coach Poitevint?" And I said, "Yes, Jesse." And so, he told me he's a police officer over in Ozark, and he was a hard-nosed little center. He's telling me about coaching his son. So yeah, I get a lot. That's as much as anything. I think that's what keeps coaches coaching, to be honest with you.
You just described it again so perfectly. It's all of these kids who come up, and you're able to to make a positive impression on them on and off the playing fields, they really do become like your children, and you want nothing but the best for them.
And when you see them, what thrills me is, and I don't know what it is, I guess the Lord's blessed me in this way, is now I might not remember their name if somebody were to say, hey, you remember this kid and so, but when I see them, it's just almost instantaneous, their name comes to me. And when they remember that or know that I remembered their names, I can see it makes a difference. So no, I've been blessed in those ways to have coached 39 and a half years. And I was, when you asked me about doing this, I decided to do something, and I took most of the morning, and this is give or take, but I coached 3 primary sports, but over 1,380 games. And that's a lot of kids, over that time frame, and football, baseball, basketball. And I mean, I can't obviously remember all of them probably, but I can still remember the first year and some of them. And now the wins and losses are important, but it's more important those relationships, and be able to have been an integral part in their life and our life, my life. And
Coach, you're talking about somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 student athletes over almost 40 years.
Most definitely.
That's amazing.
I coached football 32 years, baseball 27, basketball 12, track 4, wrestling 1 year, and then I was an AD for 9 and an assistant principal in some of those. But the 1 year I coached wrestling, which was in Prattville, the head coach, who was the athletic director, who came to see me one day. I was teaching PE at the 8th grade school, and he came and said, hey, same thing that Mr. Hobson did. He said, John, I got some good news and bad news for you. This was October. And I had come there. Before that, I'd been the baseball coach at Faulkner. So I had come to be the baseball coach at Prattville and to be an assistant in football. It was my first year coaching football. So he came in the middle of October and he said, I got some good news and bad news. And I said, well, coach, tell me the good news first. He said, well, you're the new wrestling coach. I said, wrestling? He said, don't call it wrestling. So the first wrestling match in high school I ever went to, I coached in. But I said, what's the bad news? He says, you're no longer the baseball coach.
Oh, no. Oh,
yeah,
no.
They had the wrestling coach at the high school is a tragic thing. His wife had been killed in a car wreck, and he was from Oklahoma. He had a little girl, and he had to go back where family was. And the baseball coach, it was going to be me and another guy, and that guy happened to be the superintendent's son. So somehow or another that got worked out. But it was a great thing for me because I really enjoyed wrestling, and it really complemented football. I think it helped me to love football more. But that was my one and only season wrestling.
Did the thought go in your mind when you were told you were being the new wrestling coach that you'd have to wear a singlet to coach?
I wouldn't have done it. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that.
That'd have been a picture for the yearbook, huh?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. But it was, and then I had a similar experience at Eufaula. That the second year I was there, I was a low man on a totem pole. I mean, I was just lucky to be there. And there wasn't many coaches in those days. That was about 79. And the principal came to me one day, start of school year, and he said, John, he said, I got some news that I'm going to need you to help me with. I said, yes, sir. He said, I need you to coach the girls basketball team. And I said, Mr. Quinney, I've never coached any girls. He goes, well, you can do it. He said, we'll talk about it as we get closer. So it got to be October, and we were on the football field practicing, and Mr. Quinney comes up to me on the field. He was dressed in his suit and all. It's hot. He comes out there and he says, hey, coach, he said, I was just curious. I got some of these parents want to know when you're going to have basketball tryouts. I said, you were serious about that? He goes, yeah. So I had to coach girls basketball. And look at this now. This shows you how much sometimes God looks after fools and lucky people. And I'm lucky. Maybe I'm a fool too. But we won the state that year. And
No,
so,
don't believe it. I don't believe a bit of this.
well, it was not me, I can assure you that. But it kept me coaching girls for a while because I kept chasing another one. And as you know, they don't come along very often.
Do you have, has it sunk in yet how astronomically unlikely that is?
Yeah, I mean,
You've never
they've
coached
been,
it. You're late to organizing the team, and then you
yeah,
go on and win the whole thing.
yeah. Well, let me say this now. I had two girls that were both high school All-Americans, and both of them played Division I
It
basketball.
was the coaching. It was the coaching.
Well, I'll tell you this, it was a lot of luck too.
That's somebody needs to write that story. I'm sorry. That
Well,
that that needs to be written.
it was one of those things that I couldn't have planned it any better, and it worked out really well. Now we didn't win another one. We had some good teams. That I did end up coaching there another 9 years. I coached, of course, at Eufaula. I coached just about everything while I was there, and then kind of toward the end of my time there, I had a desire to be a head football coach, and so that led to me leaving. And I did have that opportunity to do that for several years, and then of course, as I said, my sons were growing up, and it's just head football coach, and I have one. My oldest son is one up in the Gwinnett area now. He's the head coach at Mountain View. It just takes up so much of your time, even back then. And, so I salute anybody that's able to do it for a long, extended time.
Coach, we've got a couple of more minutes. I want to come back to the Northview years, and I want to talk about Fridays on game day at home. Rip Hughes. In the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, when the school was formed and we won the state titles, the atmosphere on campus, particularly game day, was pretty electric. The school spirit was awesome.
Absolutely.
Time you came through, things really, the dust had settled, and we weren't in that same elevated space as far as winning titles and playoffs and stuff. So it's understandable. But my question is, or the last part of my comment, those pep rallies, particularly when we had Dr. Smith as our principal and he'd lead us in the famous chant, the whole gym would just go bonkers by the time it was the end of the pep rally. Here's my question. I'm sorry for being so long-winded.
No, no.
Take us to a Friday home game. What was it like on campus? Did you guys have pep rallies? Did you go eat? Did you go to the movies?
Yes.
What was some of that like back then?
It was as good as anywhere I ever was. And now listen, the school I went to in Georgia was much bigger, and that whole county is there in Gwinnett. But it was nothing to compare to Northview. No place I was. The pep rallies were, now we didn't have one every week, but when we had them, I can remember the first one I went to, I thought, my goodness, these people are, they're going over and above what I expected. And even when we had some downtime, it didn't change that. And one of the things that stood out to me was some of the hardest cheering people in those pep rallies were our teachers and our faculty. And as you said, now I didn't serve under Dr. Smith, but Mr. Hobson, David Hobson, and Greg Allen, who were principals when I was there, they were the same. They all got into it. And I know that was a tradition that had been handed down. So the pep rallies, and on Friday nights, I told my wife the very first time we played Dothan at Rip Hughes, I said, listen, you got to get there about 5:30. She said, why so early? I said, so you get a seat. So yeah, she got there at 6:30, and she about had to stand up the entire time. So no, it's and an outsider again in some senses looking in. I kind of missed that sort of thing. I know Dothan decided to go back to a single school, but that was such a rivalry. Nothing like I'd ever been a part of.
And, well, I don't know what the attendance records were each game each year that game came around. But, you know, as we get older and our memories seem to fade a little bit, I could have sworn there were 25,000 people in
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
10,000 stadium each
Yeah.
time we played. But
Yeah.
that was our Super Bowl every year. That was our Alabama Auburn game, of course.
Yeah.
Um, did you have any rituals or superstitions as a coach?
Yeah, I didn't eat a pregame meal. I still don't. I'm a preacher now, and I still don't eat on Sundays. I don't know if it's just butterflies or what, but I mean, I would not let the players see me, you know, with any kind of nervousness. But I just, yeah, that was my. I can remember all the assistants wanted to sit beside me because they knew they were going to get my plate. We had this big defensive tackle, and after we had a few pregame meals, his name was Irwin Snell. This was back in '99, I think. And Irwin was a D1 prospect. And I noticed after, I don't know, a few games into the year, every time I'd get ready to sit down, Irwin would say, "Coach, where are you going to sit?" I said, "I'm going to sit right over there." And then he'd be sitting there when I'd sit down because he knew and he got mine too. So,
Oh, that's so great. Now, Coach, you mentioned your sons a few times, and their history with football. Did you get to coach any of your sons when they
coached
came?
all three of them I did. And it was the biggest privilege of my life. John, the oldest, is in his mid 40s now, and like I said, he's been a coach. He went to Troy, was a GA, and then later became a coach at the high school level.
Mhm.
And he coached with me for several years. He actually coached with me. He took a year off out of college, and he had the first year we were at Northview. He actually coached defensive ends with me there as a volunteer. And then he later, when we were in Georgia, he coached with me, and now he's the head coach up in Georgia. And then my youngest son, Tate. Now Tate, for all intents and purposes, you know, he might call himself a Northview graduate, even though we moved his senior year. But he was there his 9th through 11th grade years. So he's a baseball coach up in Georgia as well. And then Brad, our middle son, who lives here, and he works out at Fort Novacell, Rucker. He did graduate. He was the '01 season. He played Mike linebacker, and he was on the baseball team. All of them played Mike linebacker, and all of them were on the baseball team. So it was a privilege to coach them. I missed it. But for 12 years, they were all 4 years apart. For 12 years, I had them lined up.
Wow, that I know those were special times, but
Yeah,
you know, we always talk about how the days are long, but the years fly by. And
that's true.
it's so true that they just go by just like
Yeah.
that. Kind of like our conversation tonight. But I got one last question for you, Coach.
Okay.
You're living in Enterprise. You coached at Carroll. You coached at Northview. Are you banned from coaching at Enterprise? Do they know you live locally? Have they reached out to you?
Oh no, I wish I could. I'll be honest with you, but I've had 8 knee surgeries over my lifetime, and 2 now they're replaced. But I mean, I'm in good health. I think I am. But Chase Smith, who's an orthopedist, I mentioned him earlier. He played for me in that '99 season. He was defensive end. And he did my shoulder 2 years ago, and he said it was a train wreck. So I take his word on it. And so I don't know that I could do the grind that you'd have to do. Now, from a health standpoint, I probably could, but just the legs and all. But I enjoy, you know, going and watching. And my son, as I said, is a coach up in Georgia. We'll go up a couple times in the fall, and we try to time it so we go on a Thursday, so I can see that game Friday night, and then stay a week, see the following, and go home. So see a couple, and then in the case of our youngest son who does baseball, we do the same in the spring, and then the one that's here in Enterprise, he coaches his son's travel team. He's 11. We went to Gardendale this weekend and watched him play. So we get enough of it.
I was going to say it's you may have retired, but you're not done with the sports. That's for sure.
So I love them. So does my wife.
Oh, that's fantastic. Coach, thank you for spending some time on Conversations with Cougars. I know that your years on the scoreboard were not as productive as other years, but they definitely made an impression on all of the student athletes who you coached and just had access to during your time coaching. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And to all those former players at Northview, I salute you. I wish you the best and ask God to bless you. And thank you, brother, for the opportunity.
My pleasure. We need to get the Clint Smalls and the Chase Smiths on this program. We got a lot of folks that we still need to
Yeah.
tell the oral history of our proud program. So, Coach, hang on while I'm going to conclude here, but don't go anywhere for a second. As I just said, we haven't done many of these this year. That's on me for not reaching out to more folks. But if anybody out there who happens to watch this conversation tonight who wants to tell your story, we don't talk really a lot about the games because that's not as important as your journey and your lessons and the impact that the school had on your life. So please get in touch with me, send me messages, email, etc. But I love doing these conversations with Cougars. It takes me back to my Dothan roots and get to spend some time with folks like Coach Poitevint. So thank you. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you, man.